Our third panelist is Pedro Roig, my colleague, our senior research associate here at the Institute. As everyone knows, Pedro, former director of Radio TV Martí.
Thank you. To be the last person on long morning is usually a problem, because by this time I can see that some of you are tired by now, even though you have been enlightened by so many marvelous, great presentations. So I will try to be as precise and brief as possible. First of all, I used to be very optimistic regarding the future of Cuba, and I am now on the group of pessimists because, for some reason, as Marifeli was saying, the Castro, especially Fidel, seems to have some sort of contract with life. He refused to die. And as many times as we have predicted, he's still there. We suspect that some days he is not there with his mind, but he's there. But whatever, we can see that the military oligarchy in Cuba is getting older and is getting to a point that we can begin to see that somehow the new generation, even though they do not allow them to get control of power, that the new generation is approaching the time that they will get control of power. For example, the generals, and by the way, Cuba is and has been always a military oligarchy from day one, and it still is. The Communist Party was used by them as the bureaucrats, even though today they insist in their constitution, Article 5, that the Communist Party is the supreme power of the land. It's in the Constitution. And there are other issues in the Constitution that also, like for example, every sugar mill, farms, industries belong to the state. So, and these are in the Constitution. They might present some statutes on this, for example, on this investment, new law for foreigners, but the dominating legal standard is the Constitution, and this prevailing, and that Constitution and that law has not changed. Cuba is constitutionally, legally, a communist state. The army, the armed forces, controls at least 80% of the economy, especially Gaesa, a major, huge holding company, which is headed by the family. Rodriguez Callejas married Colonel, actually he was named recently Brigadier General, General de Brigada. He's the head of Gaesa, married, and we are not going to enter into family issues, married to Deborah Castro, the eldest son of Raul, eldest daughter of Raul. So, and then you have Alejandro Castro, Espin, the son of Raul, which had a very strange position where he supervised the corruptions from the Minfar and the Minin on the economy. So now you have another Castro looking at every business and every operation that is going on in Cuba. So his son-in-law controlled Gaesa, the militaries control 80% of the economy, and his son supervised what is being done. So there you have the frame of younger generations moving, and it gets me, and by the way, today, the presence of the Cubans in Venezuela is a major, vital presence with over 7,000 hard troops, frontline troops from the Minin. That's besides the thousands of doctors and nurses and other people in Venezuela. And these Cubans are well-trained, and they will fight to preserve as much as they can. So that makes the Venezuela situation very, very dangerous for freedom in Venezuela, because the Cubans, Raul Castro and his government, need the subsidy from Venezuela, because there are no other country on this planet that will bring $10 billion per year to the Cuban economy. The Chinese don't even think on dogmatic terms, neither the Russians. So this amount of money won't be, and if it's cut or reduced, it will create a huge problem to an economy that is already in a very tough situation. So, but that doesn't mean that this is going to change tomorrow. Now, going back to the military generations, today, the heads of the major armies in Cuba, the three armies, the head of the armies did not fight in the mountains with Fidel and Raul. They are in their middle 50s. They create their bonds in Africa, in Angola, in Somalia, in Ethiopia. So their bonds are not the Sierra Maestra brotherhood. They had their own brotherhood. And with them, we might have what Marifeli was mentioning, the possibility. Their commitment is different, and they might serve as the balance of a kind of opening for Cuba that can have different directions. But I do believe that the Cuban army, especially with that generation, could become what happened, like the Spanish army, that was a pivot on the movement of Spain to democracy. This is a long, far-fetched idea that I hope that can become true, because I don't see any movement in Cuba without, real opening without the participation of the army. And to conclude, I just want to mention something else, which has to do with the Russian model. I believe that every day what is going on in Cuba is beginning to reflect more the Russian model than the Chinese model. And the belief is that they are positioning themselves in the major corporations. They did that in Russia. I remember going in 1991 with Jorge Mas to Moscow, and we met with some of the people in those corporations. They were opening Russia to glasnost and perestroika. And most of the managers were officers of the Russian army. So we are seeing that, and they move from being the manager to moving into ownership of those corporations. So what I'm saying and what I'm seeing is that possibility. Now, anything can happen. It can, because there are too many variables on this scenario. But I do believe that we are reaching a point of some sort of change. Still pessimistic and hoping for the best. Thank you.
Pedro, thank you very much. He's certainly an expert on the Cuban military. Before we take questions, do you think a Putin can emerge from out of the Cuban elite, out of Minint or Minfar, a Putin who could operate and operationalize the Russian model in Cuba?
Well, knowing the Cubans, we might have 200 or 300 Putins on the making. No, it is possible. But like Putin, nobody knew about him at the time. So yes, he could be there.
It's probably not Diaz-Canel, though, or do you think it might be?
Look, it could be. Well, Diaz-Canel do not have the background of Putin, as far as we know. I mean, Putin come from the KGB. You know better than us. You have studied that. So his training and his set of mind is completely different to what Diaz-Canel can have. And I think by naming Diaz-Canel has been a smart move to the Castro regime, because at least they are putting a civilian and they could make the front looking better. Now, could the hardcore accept Putin, Diaz-Canel as their leader? That's a huge question.
Thank you, Pedro.